Well, President Carter, thank you so much for coming in. And you know, I don't need to tell you, in Columbus, Ohio, when it comes to athletics, it's a pretty big deal. And I know it's a big deal for you. I want to ask you something. I've often said, if you're going to keep score, I want to win.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Absolutely. I mean, since I was a kid playing hockey, playing basketball, running track, baseball, I always had this mentality: if you're going to play the game, play to win. And of course, my 38 year in the military career, I mean, the American public just expects when you go out there and fly a mission, you're supposed to be successful. You're supposed to win every time. So I have that kind of same mindset in sports.
What is your mission, I guess? What do you tell your coaches that you expect when you're a coach at Ohio State?
Win with dignity, win with humility. You've heard Ryan Day speak to that. You know, we play by the rules and, you know, expect to win.
You mentioned Ryan Day. Obviously, football's pretty big around here.
Yeah, sure is.
Did any of that surprise you with what football means to this state, to this community?
You know, I thought I had a pretty good idea. You know, I've been, you know, Navy football when I was the superintendent of the Naval Academy, certainly being in Nebraska, a storied program there. This is next level, next level. I mean, I don't know that there's another bigger, more engaged, passionate fan base than Ohio State Buckeye fans.
I'm a big fan of Ryan Day. I think he's the best coach in the country. How about you and the job that he's done? He's got a national championship to prove it.
Yeah. Well, if Ryan were sitting here, I'd say the same thing. I'm just proud of him. I'm proud that he's had to go through some adversity. He's overcome that. For them to come back and win the championship, you know, the year before last, after that tough loss to the school up north, is really one of the most storied comebacks, maybe in college football lore. Now we're in this whole new era of the 12 college football playoff. We're still learning. There's still a lot to learn. I mean, if there's one thing that I have seen, and I'm sure you talk about it all the time, is if you're going to win a championship on a run like that, you better have a very experienced team. I mean, look at Indiana. What was the average age? 23 and a half? We were more experienced when we won. Oh, and if you got a bye, you have a chance of being part of 1 in 7. One team has won that's had a bye. That was Indiana. So that there's something there that we got to pay attention to.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you think about the modern world of college football, and you know, I've said we're witnessing the professionalism of college football to a certain extent. The players are now getting paid. You mentioned that, you know, 1 in 7. And 12 teams. Yeah. The Big Ten wants 24-team playoff. The SEC wants 16. You're involved with all that process. What are we looking at?
I think we're just going to have to let it play out. We're going to be in 12 for at least the next year, maybe 2 more years. I think they could still perfect that. You know, like I'm a little bit like a lot of fans. You know, we don't need more teams. You know, let's go back to the old format when there were only 4 teams in it. If you're Ohio State and you're one of the 4, your odds are a heck of a lot better, right? So, you know, with 12, if we can get the scheduling down right, you know, that's going to make us competitive. But I do believe there's going to be some level of expansion. And whatever that's going to be, 16 going to 24, going right to 24, let's just make sure we get it right and for all the right reasons. And part of it may be this scheduling. And what we need to make sure that we're doing is we're protecting the student athletes. In other words, adding another game because you want to have more teams in it is not the right answer. So something's got to give. More than likely, you know, conference championships come off the table. And of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased here. I want to protect the Army-Navy game. That is still America's game. It's going to have its own time slot. It's not, Army-Navy are not likely to be in one of those 12, 16, or 24. So we've got to figure all that out and get it right. And of course, you know, between the SEC and the Big Ten, they're the biggest influencers in those decisions.
Are we seeing a super conference in the future, do you think, that football needs to be taken out of the mix and football its own thing?
You know, I'm always going to be protective of the Ohio State Buckeyes. And if we put ourselves into some sort of bigger league than what we are in already in the Big Ten, it has a chance of diluting our brand. So I'm not going to be the first one to sign up for that. You know, we're 18 teams now. Some people might argue that diluted us a little bit from what we were. But yet the Big Ten now is an even more powerful brand because of it. So I'm going to say in the experiment of that expansion, Ohio State is still at the top of that list, and our brand matters. Not only the most recognizable brand, but the most powerful athletic Division I sports program in the country. I mean, 36 Division I sports. Nobody else is doing that except for Navy and Stanford at 35. So I love our brand. I want to protect it.
You know, you mentioned the 18 teams. Ohio State, in my opinion, has really carried this league the last few years. Should Ohio State have a bigger vote, do you think?
Well, that's always a hot topic. If we're carrying the vast majority of the brand and there's ever going to be some differentiated payment within the league, which we've talked about, but we haven't got there yet, there's no doubt that there's some schools that ought to be higher up in that conversation. Certainly should be Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Washington, USC. I think they all should be in that conversation now. You can't argue about Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana, what they did, and you brought it up, getting older, the model seems to be changing every year.
Yeah.
Are we seeing a change of the guards where you're still going to recruit the high school players, but maybe not as many? You're going to go after the 5 stars. You're going to go after the Jeremiah Smiths, but there is more value now on the transfer portal, yes?
We can argue about how we wish it would be like it used to be. But you're right, there's a professionalization to a certain degree with players getting paid, NIL, transfer portal. The years of getting that 4 or 5 star out of high school, developing that young man in a football program for 4 or maybe 5 years, I think will be less the model than will be what it used to be. And you're going to see more of what we saw this year. 30 players leave Ohio State. You look at who we brought in to replace those, 14 of them have 3 years of playing experience or more. So there's the model right there. And Ryan knows that he needs an experienced team. Look at the kicker that we got coming out of Baylor, right? He's got 3 years of kicking. He made 3 out of 4 kicks outside of 50 yards. Connor's going to be a heck of a kicker for us next year.
It sounds to me like you know this roster. How involved are you in the football? And does Ryan get your opinion, I guess?
No. I let the coaching,
but you watch it.
The coach is a coach. Ryan and I have had great conversation. I do the same thing with Ross. I let the experts who are doing this work, Matt Patricia, come on, Art Smith. We got 2 NFL former head coaches now run the offense and the defense. I love what I see coming around the corner. But am I a student of the game? Do I pay attention? You bet.
You mentioned the genie's out of the bottle, and I don't think the genie's going back in. The kids are now getting played. Some people worry that this is not sustainable. That with you got the Pro Football League and you have that. How is this sustainable? And do you worry where it could be heading?
Yeah, I am worried, and I'll just say right up front, I'm not trying to make a headline. It's not sustainable. If you look at their trajectory of when we started with the House versus the NCAA and where we've just gone in the last couple of years, yes, we're moving them out of third party to more interior. We've got this College Sports Commission that's supposed to help vet all this. It is not sustainable over the next 3 years unless something changes. Now, that said, Ohio State is still competitive. There's only about 5 schools in the country that can play at this level right now in terms of NIL. Fortunately, we're one of them. But even at that level, especially we want to field a really good men's basketball team, a women's basketball team, and compete in other sports like ice hockey, it's not sustainable. Something's going to have to give.
And how do you do that? What do you do? Because right now, basically, obviously the universities, the 21 million or whatever you're given, then you're looking at outside donors, but every year you got to go back.
Yeah. So I think there's going to have to be some rules that are put up like bumper pads on a bowling alley to kind of make sure that you're not throwing the gutter ball. And, that hasn't happened yet. Whether it be at the NCAA level, whether it be the conference commissioners through the university presidents and chancellors getting together, or even legislation coming out of the government, something's going to have to accelerate this before it gets too far out of control, which some people would argue it already is now.
You mentioned other sports, basketball. What's your take on the basketball program? And, I'm not sure where they are in NIL money, but does that need to be better?
It does. I think Jake in his second year has been doing a really good job as our basketball coach. We've been competitive in most of our games, even against, number 15 UVA. Now you got John Mobley with his little pinky finger broken on a shooting hand, and yet Bruce Thornton, who is one of the nicest guys you're ever going to meet in your life, that guy should be in the NBA. I want to see him get into the tournament more than anything. They've still got a chance. They still got to play some big games. They got to play Wisconsin. They got to play Purdue. we're going to have to get a win or two out of there for us to get in, and we probably got to win at least a game or two in the Big Ten, tournament.
You mentioned Coach Deebs. He's been this close,
Yeah.
and I hate to say it. I told him. I said, bad luck. We got to get rid of it. They've just had the most inopportune injuries.
Yeah. Now, I go back to my experience at Nebraska. Fred Hoiberg, his second year, he won one Big Ten game, one. And there was a lot of people calling him to be fired. We didn't do it. Look what he's done at Nebraska. So, these things can be cyclic. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen here. Again, we should have an expect-to-win attitude. We can do the NIL for both football and basketball.
The other sports, 36 total.
Yeah.
You want to keep them all. Now, it may be different how you fund them.
Well, first thing I want to say is how proud I am of the fact that we added 91 scholarships out of our $20.5 million of NIL money, and we invested that into those scholarships. That went mostly through Olympic sports. So that's a real positive for our 36 Division I sports. But the second piece I want to say is it is about the student-athlete model that we espouse at Ohio State, and we have been so successful there. Our graduation rate is one of the top in the country. Our student-athletes, most of them don't go on to the pros, whether you're on the pistol team, on the fencing team, on the artistic swimming team, where you're on swimming and diving, where you're on men's lacrosse, who won the Big Ten championship last year. And how about looking at men's and women's tennis? Our men's team beat number 1 Texas, number 1 UVA, beat Stanford in a close one after being down 3-1 last night. Now they're taking on UVA again to go for the championship. Our sports across the board, and let's talk about wrestling. Okay, yep, didn't work out so good for us, at Penn State. And by the way, Penn State's really good.
Pretty good.
But an undefeated season going in, so we had a couple injuries. You can pick your sport here and become a fan, and you've got something to cheer for, and that's part of what we're all about.
I'm a big fan of yours, and thank you for your service to the country. But I think, athletics, like being in the military, there's so many life lessons you can learn from it, and that, from young kids to when you can play at the highest level, like at Ohio State, I think it's important that we keep that model.
Absolutely. You and I could go over experiences and stories when you played football at Otterbein. I got to play hockey as a freshman in all 4 years at the U.S. Naval Academy. I probably don't even stay at the Naval Academy if I don't make the hockey team because I had other options. The lessons I learned by playing, a college level sport and being the captain of the team in my senior year took me into my military career, and I still reflect on those even today.
Let me ask you a couple hard questions, and I'll go on the record. I'm not a big fan of the conference championship. I think in today's modern game, it's neat to be able to say, hey, we were Big Ten champs, but, they didn't have it back when Woody was here.
Right.
It's winning the national title's the most important goal. Do you see the conference championship eventually going away?
If we go to 16 or 24 and everybody agrees to it, certainly at 24 it'll have to. You can't do both. At 16, we have to look at it and see what that looks like and how many buys and what that all measures out to be. I was at the Big Ten championship game this year. There was a lot of buzz. When you get the right two teams in it, it's hard to beat. That was quite a marquee matchup. In fact, I would argue in some ways that was the national championship game. It's interesting, the two teams we lost to were the ones that played in the championship game. So when it's that level and it's that exciting, it's hard to replace. Now, I've also had experiences in other conferences where you're playing in a championship game and you lose players that get hurt, and then whether it be in the bowl or some other level, you end up losing more than you gain.
Georgia found that out.
Yeah, so there's going to be conversations on both sides of that. For now, in a 12-team format, I'm fine with the conference championship, but let's make it mean something too.
Yeah, the other thing is, I don't know. It just seems to me there's a lot of work to need to do with the playoff system. But like this year, I don't like the 2 weeks in between games either. To me, the season's too long.
And over the holidays.
Yeah.
So you spread that out and you throw the holidays in the mix. It's really hard. As good as our coaching staff was, there's no argument. Our guys were not really ready in the first quarter against Miami. It was obvious.
The other thing they talk about is, just the whole. You mentioned that we didn't look ready against Miami or whatever, but you played in that game, you get beat by Indiana, you come back and all that, and you have all that time off. It's You could, I don't know. I think we had the model the year before Ohio State.
We kind of did.
Because you had an old quarterback and an old team,
Yep.
and you just went right into it.
Yeah. I mean, everybody thought Tennessee was going to come into our backyard with 40,000 fans and take it to us. And it was the opposite. And then remember, we had to go play undefeated Oregon in the Rose Bowl, and nobody had us but maybe a point one way or the other, and we just railroaded them. So yes, the formula was there, and we beat every game, every team that year by double digits, every game.
We mentioned the changing of the guard, too. The Big Ten, to me, nothing against the SEC, but the Big Ten seems to be it. You look coast to coast. Is that the way you see it right now?
Well, for the conferences that are playing coast to coast, the model is certainly football. It works. It's a lot harder in the Olympic sports. I'm going to just say that up front. The Big Ten does an exceptional job. It's even harder for those West Coast teams because with only 4 West Coast teams in the Big Ten, they're doing more of the traveling. So we have to acknowledge that having teams in all of the time zones in the United States is a challenge, with the exception of football, because that can be managed. I think Big Ten right now has established themselves as the football conference. Now, we can argue about who's stronger across from number 1 down to the bottom of the conference. That is a good conversation. But right now, at the top of the conference, Big Ten looks really strong.
The game that we all talk about, the game.
The game.
Does there need to be any changes with that? I've heard people say maybe, well, first of all, the sanctity of that game, you could play them 3 times with the current system or whatever. I mean, I've heard some people say maybe they need to move that game. It's just, has it become too big, or I don't know. What's your feeling on that?
I love rivalries. I grew up with Army Navy. I love the game, and I don't think it should move. I think it should be the Saturday of Thanksgiving. And, God willing, we only play it once. We don't have to play it in a conference championship or then a national championship. But if we do, then we do. But I'll always advocate to have that game at the end of the year.
What is your message to the fans? And I've often said the greatest thing about Ohio State and the worst thing about Ohio State are the fans, because they're so passionate.
Yeah.
I don't have to tell you. But I think sometimes we forget nobody wants to win more than the athletes and the coaches, right?
Yeah, and I think, I think 96% of all the fans get that. They understand that our coaches are human. They have kids. They're in high school. Our players are doing everything they can to win. They want to win more than anybody. So when things don't go right, and let's face it, sports is dynamic. The other team gets a vote, and it doesn't always work out every time, And I think some of this challenge is the betting that goes on out there, because people now have a different level of investment in this because they're not only rooting for their team, they're betting. That becomes a little bit of a challenge. So, you got to just take a deep breath and know that, hey, it's a privilege to be an Ohio State Buckeye fan. They got one of the winningest programs, regardless of which sport you pick, of anywhere out there. Yes, and I know the basketball faithful out there go, yeah, but what about basketball? I'm telling you, we're going to get that. We're going to get there because that is our tradition here. We play to win. We expect to win.
Last couple things. You said none of this is sustainable. Something's got to. Do you think we're heading that direction? And do you see a day, and I'll just ask you because everybody's been against it, nobody wants the players to be employees. Why is that, and is that coming, though?
Well, it'll be a conversation for sure, and it may happen, coming out of the White House for all we know. I mean, there could be a commission put together that will talk about how does this play out. I'm a big believer that we don't want to make our athletes employees because I think ultimately they lose. They lose things like scholarship. There'll be much less incentive to graduate and get a degree, which is something that we hold dear. They could lose support for medical care after they leave a program. So I just see more downside to becoming an employee or becoming unionized than the upside. And then depending on states and employee rules, you might have to actually apply for some of these positions. So, be careful what you wish for. The second, third order effects are not going to be what you like.
Last thing, when will this all be settled? And is it still going to be, how much longer will it be a work in progress?
Well, I have a good feeling if you don't retire and I stay here for a few years, we'll still be talking about this in a couple of years.
So, a couple of years.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's settled by then?
I think it will have to. I'd say 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years. Thank you for coming down.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.